In this video, I'm going to talk about the industry game versus the indie game. And these are two different kind of marketing angles that any artist can take depending on what works best for them, their genre, their demographics, etc. And I've come up with this phrase because some people come to me and they're like, hey, I want to promote my music on streaming. I want to grow my mailing list. I want to tour. I want to sell merch. And some people have different angles. They want to do one thing but not the other. And that's kind of where these two buckets come from. So let me explain each of them and then we'll dive into how to figure out which one you want to do. So first, let's start with the industry game. And the reason why I call it the industry game is because this is how most like major label artists or artists who want to kind of be a bigger artist play the game. They focus a lot more on the DSPs, the streaming platforms, Spotify, Apple Music, and they focus a lot on social media, Instagram, TikTok, etc. In general, the industry game is focused on getting as many people as possible, but those people are a lot more shallow in their engagement. So you're kind of building up the volume first, and then as you go, eventually you're kind of along the way building the depth as you go. But you're really playing a big numbers game when you're doing the industry thing. The indie game is almost the polar opposite. You're not really focused on streaming. You're not really focused on the DSPs like Spotify. What you are focused on is building deep, meaningful connections with individual super fans. So you're going to be focused on growing your mailing list. You're going to be focused on selling merch and sales funnels and all the kind of online e-commerce stuff. You're going to be focused on touring and maybe Patreon groups. So you're kind of focused on getting less fans, but getting more invested fans who are not just more invested emotionally, but financially. Like you're finding fans who love you enough where they actually want to buy your stuff and come out to see you and take part in Patreon groups, etc. And there's advantages and pros and cons to that as well. So the biggest difference between these two, in my opinion, is what type of person you want to be. Because a lot of it depends on your genre. Like if you're in hip hop or EDM, you're probably going to have a harder time playing the indie game. And that's because playing shows is a little harder when you're a hip hop or EDM artist compared to like a rock band or a pop punk band. You might know that like a lot of fans in this niche don't really buy much stuff. For example, like selling CDs, still super viable, right? 40 million CDs and 40 million vinyls are sold every year in the United States. However, that the genres that they sell in are completely different. So like a hip hop artist, like hip hop sales for CDs in the United States, super low. But if you start looking at a lot of other genres, they can be a lot higher. So your genre will kind of pigeonhole you a little bit. But even outside of that, it comes down to what kind of artist you want to be. If you're focusing on the industry game, you're focused on getting a lot of people. You're going to be a lot more well known, and you're going to have a lot more listeners and fans and feedback and stuff like that because you're just way more people who are listening to your stuff. And that might be something that excites you. You might really, really want that. The indie game, again, polar opposite, where you're probably not going to be this big artist on any individual platform. But a lot of these indie guys, these indie game artists, they might have like 10,000 monthly listeners or even less, 1,000 monthly listeners on Spotify, but they're making $50,000 a year from their music, right? Because they play a lot of shows and they know they can draw a crowd. And so they get paid well for their shows and they play big venues and they do a really good job at selling to their fans with merch and CDs and vinyls and Patreon packages. So they're making like a lot more money per person. But from the outside in, you'd be like, they're just a small artist. There's no way that they're doing this full time, but in reality, they are. And you might see an artist playing the industry game having, 100,000 monthly listeners, for example, and they might be making way less than the indie artist. But it depends, right? Depends on what their costs are and all that. Because if they have 100,000 monthly listeners with 1 million streams a month, they're making $3,000 a month, but they're still making less with 1 million streams a month than the indie artist with 1,000 monthly listeners who might be selling a ton of merch and a ton of touring. Now, neither of these are necessarily easier because it might sound like a lot of people that kind of push the merch and the super fan thing, a lot of them will make it sound really easy, right? And it's not. It's just as hard as the industry game in a lot of ways. But I would say that the indie game has a faster path to profitability. What I mean by that is a lot of people that push this, when they talk about, I can sell all these CDs and all this merch, they're not factoring in like all the work and all the expenses that go into that. Because I've done the free plus shipping and handling funnels, I've done the merch stores, I've done the email list growth. It's really difficult and it can be very expensive, especially when you're starting off. But the Spotify thing, it's really easy to get started. You can get a ton of streams, but it generally will take longer for you to hit a point of break-evenness on that industry game than the indie game. Now, there is a world in which you can play both of these games. In fact, a lot of the industry people at some point will start playing the indie game. And at that point, it's not really an indie game anymore. They're just kind of, they've gotten high enough in the industry ladder where they can start actually doing some of these things. But similarly, a lot of people that play the indie game might first build this kind of money-making machine with their diehard fans, and then use some of that funding to pay to develop some of these streaming platforms and these social media sites to kind of start getting the volume of people. And then they already have this ecosystem of e-commerce stuff that they can funnel those people into. There's no right or wrong answer for what you start with, but you can't really do both at the same time. I mean, you can, but you're going to go crazy trying to do it because there's a lot to both sides. You're going to have a lot of money to get both sides rolling. And ideally, you're going to pick one as your starting point and then kind of start filling in the other one as you go on the other side. So which type of artist are you? Are you an industry artist or an indie artist? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want to learn how you can play the industry game, or at least one aspect of it, check out this video right here to learn how to get 1 million streams your first year on Spotify releasing music. And if you'd rather play the indie game, check out this video right here. That might be more up your alley. But yeah, thanks for watching. Hope you found this interesting, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.